At 9:04 in the morning, on December 6, 1917, the city of Halifax ceased to exist. Not entirely, not permanently, but for one fraction of 1 second, the sky above the harbor turned white, the ground beneath the city lifted, and a pressure wave moved outward at the speed of sound and flattened everything within 1.5 miles of the waterfront. Windows shattered as far away as Truro, 100 kilometers north. The sound was heard in Prince Edward Island. Nearly 2,000 people were killed in under 20 seconds. Hundreds more were blinded, most of them by flying glass, standing at their windows watching the fire on the water that nobody yet understood was about to kill them. It was the largest man-made explosion in human history, until August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. This is the story of what happened in Halifax Harbour that morning, how 2 ships, 1 war, and 20 seconds of fire changed a city forever, and what the people in power spent the next several months trying to make sure you never found out. To understand what happened in Halifax in December of 1917, you need to understand what Halifax had become. By the 3rd year of the First World War, Halifax Harbour was one of the busiest ports in the world. Every convoy of men, supplies, and munitions crossing the Atlantic to the Western Front passed through here. Ships arrived daily from across North America, loaded with everything the war machine required, and departed in convoy for Britain and France. The city had grown rapidly to support this traffic. The waterfront was dense with warehouses, rail lines, and working-class neighborhoods. Families lived within a few hundred meters of the docks. Children walked to school along the harbor road every morning. The war had made Halifax essential. It had also made it dangerous. The harbor was divided by a barrier net, a standard wartime precaution against German submarines. Ships entering and leaving had to pass through a narrow, controlled channel with strict rules about direction and speed. On the morning of December 6th, those rules were about to be broken. 2 ships were moving through that channel at the same time. One of them was carrying enough high explosives to level a small city. The other didn't know it. The Mont-Blanc was a French cargo vessel. She had arrived in Halifax the night before, too late to join her outbound convoy, and had anchored in the harbor to wait. Her cargo manifest was, by any reasonable measure, terrifying. In her holds, 2,300 tons of wet picric acid, a compound used in artillery shells, highly flammable and shock-sensitive. 200 tons of TNT, 35 tons of benzol, a highly volatile fuel stored in drums on her open deck, and 10 tons of gun cotton. The Mont-Blanc was not marked as a munitions ship. She flew no warning flags. By wartime security protocol, her cargo was classified. The harbor pilot who guided her in that morning knew what she was carrying. Almost nobody else did. Moving in the opposite direction through that same narrow channel was the Emo, a Norwegian relief ship contracted to carry supplies to war-ravaged Belgium. She was running behind schedule. Her captain had ordered full speed to make up time. The 2 ships saw each other. They signaled. They misread each other's intentions. They both turned the wrong way. At 8:45 a.m., the Emo's bow struck the Mont-Blanc on the starboard side, tearing open her forward hold and spilling benzol across her deck. The benzol ignited immediately. The Mont-Blanc was on fire. The crew of the Mont-Blanc knew exactly what their ship was carrying. They knew that a fire on a vessel loaded with picric acid, TNT, and benzol had one possible outcome. They abandoned ship immediately, rowing hard for the Dartmouth shore, shouting warnings in French that nobody on the Halifax waterfront understood. The burning Mont-Blanc drifted, unmanned, towards Pier 6, one of the busiest sections of the Halifax waterfront. Stevedores were arriving for the morning shift. A crowd had gathered on the shore and on the Richmond hillside above the harbor. People stood at their windows. Children pressed their faces to school windows watching the spectacle of a burning ship. fire crews responded. A harbor tug moved to push the Mont-Blanc away from the pier. The crew of a naval vessel, the Stella Maris, worked to attach a tow line. None of them knew what she was carrying. At 9:04 a.m. and 35 seconds, the Mont-Blanc's cargo detonated. The blast was felt 400 kilometers away in Cape Breton. The fireball rose to 1,800 meters into the sky. A column of smoke climbed to 3,600 meters. The pressure wave demolished every structure within half a kilometer of the pier instantly. The Richmond neighbourhood, a working-class community of several thousand people, was erased completely in seconds. Every person standing at a window watching the fire was blinded by the glass. Every firefighter who'd responded to the burning ship was killed. The crew of the Stella Maris, every one of them, was killed. The harbor tug was found days later in Dartmouth. The Mont-Blanc's anchor shank, 1 ton of forged steel, landed 3.5 kilometers away. In the immediate aftermath, Halifax was barely a functioning city. Approximately 1,600 people had been killed outright. Another 400 would die of injuries in the following days. 9,000 people were injured. 6,000 were homeless in December in Nova Scotia. And then, the night after the explosion, a blizzard hit. The relief effort that followed was, by the standards of the time, remarkable. Trains arrived from across Canada and from Boston within 24 hours, carrying doctors, nurses, supplies, and volunteers. The response from Massachusetts was so swift and so significant that Nova Scotia still sends a Christmas tree to Boston every year as a gesture of gratitude. But there's another part of the story. In the weeks after the explosion, as the city tried to understand what had happened, the question of blame became a political emergency. The pilot who had guided the Mont-Blanc into the harbor, Francis Mackey, was arrested and charged with manslaughter. So was the captain of the Emo. So was the naval officer responsible for harbor traffic. The investigation that followed was rushed, politically motivated, and deeply unfair. Mackey, who had followed standard procedure, was exonerated, but not before his name had been destroyed. The naval officer, Frederick Wyatt, became the official scapegoat for a system failure that reached far beyond any one man's decision. The full story of what the Naval Command knew, when they knew it, and what they chose to do about it, that story took decades to properly investigate. Halifax rebuilt. It took years. Some of the communities destroyed in the blast, particularly the Richmond neighborhood, were rebuilt in ways that did not reflect the people who had lived there before. Decisions made about who got housing, who got compensation, who was included in the official memorial, those decisions were not made equally. The Halifax explosion is remembered today primarily as a tragedy of scale. The numbers, the force of the blast, the world record it held for 30 decades. What is less remembered is what it revealed about how Canadian institutions respond to disaster. Who gets protected, who gets blamed, who gets written out. That pattern, powerful institutions, convenient scapegoats, and the slow disappearance of the uncomfortable truth, is not unique to Halifax in 1917. It appears again and again in the stories we cover on this channel. If this video made you look at Canadian history differently, subscribe. A new story every week. Next time, the soldiers who were sent to die on a French beach in 1942 and the British commanders who knew before the boats ever left England that the mission was doomed. The Dieppe raid. That's next.